In most tenure-track faculty positions, you are screwed without the ability to bring in external funding. And even if funding is not the priority in your type of faculty position, it is definitely desirable because it affords us freedom. I know because I brought in close to $6 million of funding together with collaborators, including indirect costs, during my second year in a tenure-track faculty position. And it allows me, or affords me, great freedom. It affords me the freedom to do whatever I desire, including the research that I want to pursue, and including my mission here to help you become a more impactful, more empowered, more fulfilled scientist or academic, whatever it might be that you are doing. I want to be honest here for a second and say that if you don't have the level of funding that you desire right now, it is within your control to change that. But you need to take charge of changing that. I'm not saying that it is fast or that it is easy, but I am saying that it is within your control to change the level of funding that you have right now, if that's really what you want. I'm talking from personal experience. I went from a triaged K99 during my postdoc to a fairly high level of funding for the stage of career that I am in right now. I'm in the fourth year of my faculty position now. And this didn't just come to me. I'm not a skilled grant writer. Well, I'm a skilled grant writer. I'm not a gifted grant writer. I didn't come that way, okay? I wasn't born a gifted grant writer. I worked for that very hard. And with persistence. And you know, honestly, the level of effort that I put into learning how to write grants is very likely more than most people are willing to put in, and that's the only difference. That's the only difference between me having a high level of funding and somebody like you maybe out there who doesn't have the desired level of funding. But you can change that if you're willing to. So when I was a postdoc, I had moved from Germany to the US and was introduced to this interesting game of bringing in funding pretty quickly, because the lab that I joined went from 3-hour ones to 1-hour one in a fairly short amount of time. So it felt like all we did there for a few years was writing grants or generating data for grants, reading grants, trying to give feedback on grants, mostly on the approach section. Like, we oftentimes get not very deep feedback from our colleagues on the writing or the strategy or the structure of a proposal, but mostly on the approach. And mostly that's a very ineffective way to receive and give feedback. But let me step back here and tell you the story. So I was this postdoc. I learned very quickly that we are screwed if we don't bring in funding. And so a opportunity to take a grant writing course came my way, and I took this opportunity. And went through this course. It was like a home study course. It was super interesting because it looked at grant writing from a very different perspective that we are used to looking at grant writing. And I'm happy to share what this resource is. Just let me know in the comments if you need to know. It looked at grant writing from a point of service, like providing a service to our community, moving the entire community along, and it provided techniques that aligned who I am and the research that I am doing with the community's needs. I've never thought about grant writing or manuscript writing in that kind of way. So I found it exciting. But I also realized very quickly that while I understood this from a cognitive or from a mental perspective, right? Like understood the concepts, it was hard for me to put those concepts into my writing. So I attended a retreat, like maybe half a year later. And I went to this retreat with the belief that I need a K99 funded, otherwise I'm going to be screwed. Again, I had like a lot of this kind of thinking going on back then about being screwed if there's no funding coming in. So I had made up my mind that I needed a K99 in order to further pursue my goal of getting a faculty position. So I went to this retreat with this belief, and two things happened there. Number one, I was disabused of this belief that I really needed that K99 to pursue a faculty position. Why was that important? It's important because when we approach writing grants from a perspective of scarcity, from a perspective of desperation, that translates into our writing, into our tone, into this connection that we create with the reviewer. And it's not a connection or an energy that you want to put out there, right? When you want to put out there that you're an authority in this field of research that you're writing about. So we needed to abuse me of this belief that I needed a funded K99 in order to get a faculty position. And in fact, you know, this K99 was triaged. I didn't get the K99, I did get the faculty position. So that was a bogus belief. And so that was actually the nature of the work that we did there at this grant writing retreat. We worked on writing, but we also worked a lot on the stuff, the beliefs, the mental systems or mental models that kept people from putting their best efforts into this grant writing game, right? How often have you promised to yourself that you would start earlier this time? How often have you actually scheduled time to write on your calendar only to then ignore these time blocks to do something completely different that seemed urgent and important in the moment, but you know, if you look at it from in hindsight, it really wasn't necessary that you spent your time in that way. How often have you rushed submitting this grant proposal and not spend all this time beforehand to gain a lot of clarity and to take your time crafting a proposal that you can be proud of? Those are the kind of mind games that we play with with ourselves rather, right? I mean, also with each other, because then we start telling ourselves, our colleagues, these stories of how we don't have enough time, how we have to rush, how we have to pull all-nighters when we get ready to actually submit a proposal. So that was the nature of the work done at the retreat there, you know, resolving these kind of issues. And that is something that really has changed my mind ever since, not just my mind, yes, also, but my life ever from that point forward. So I continued to work with this mentor, not on writing at first. So that was back in 2012. In 2014, I submitted this triaged K99. I had some support and feedback on the K99, but not in-depth support. But I tried, like I had learned techniques to use to write good proposals, and it worked for a few other applications. It didn't work for the K99. That wasn't due to the techniques, that was due to my inability to properly use them. Now, when I actually started my faculty position in 2016, I knew that if I wanted to be successful, if I'm really committed to my success, I needed more help. So I signed up for more help. And this is help, which now did not just include giving me techniques and giving me a different way of looking at grant writing. It actually included a lot of feedback. And it included strategy. So when do you actually write a grant? How long do you ruminate on a grant? How long do you keep collecting data to support your proposal? When do you let it fly? When is it ready to go? So this came in a complete package, and as I mentioned, I put a lot of effort into this. So for 2 years, not non-stop and not every week, but I continuously worked on my grantsmanship skills. And then the year before I started really submitting, and before this funding then came in, I worked on my grant writing skills but really consistently every week. So have you actually focused on your skill building for that period of time consistently? And if the answer is no, then you have your answer in why you might not be seeing the results that you would like to see. So I want to make one thing clear. If you don't have funding, that doesn't mean that you are a bad scientist. It means that you have bad or no strategy, and it means that you're lacking the skill to write powerful grant proposals. You are, however, I mean, I'm German, I'm just frank, sorry, you are a bad leader of your team if you don't take the time to acquire the skills that you need to write grant proposals that are funded. So we often hear stories perpetuated. That's like one of our hobbies as academics, to complain about the difficult funding situation, funding environment. But the environment, for most of us, is not the first problem. Most of the proposals that are submitted have a problem of quality. And it's not necessarily the quality of science. That's what people focus on the most, right? It's not necessarily that. It's a lack of clarity. It's a lack of appropriate presentation, where you line your research up with what the community's needs are. It's a lack of thoughtfulness, and it's a lack of logic, cohesiveness. The challenge is that most of my colleagues do not attribute their lack in funding, their lack of success getting grant proposals funded, to the lack of their skills. And so they put the responsibility outside of themselves. They blame the environment, they blame, you know, a lack of overall funding for research. They blame the review system, the mean reviewer, everything out there except for your own skills. So here's the thing. Once you put at least a year of focus on learning the art of grant writing and the effort to analyze your field's needs, if you take at least 6 months to craft a clear and compelling proposal that is coherent and consistent and logical, and then you don't get that funded, then you get to blame the environment, but only then. So in our training, there really isn't an official part that says, oh, all scientists or researchers, all academics have to go through this training of academic writing or grant writing for professionals, right? You don't have that. although there are more resources now. But the resources that are out there oftentimes focus on administrative aspects of submitting a proposal, the funding opportunities, formalities like style, and at that often with wrong premises. They're oftentimes way too short to dive in deeply. They are often based on rumors and hearsay other than or instead of the tools, strategies, and feedback that help people learn this craft. And sometimes they are run by people who haven't been funded in years. And so that stuff isn't working. I tried that stuff myself. It's super boring to sit through workshops that are on the administrative parts of how to submit a grant. I mean, you know, that's the thing. This is kind of the given part, right? If you can't figure out how to get the administrative part right, well, then your grant proposal won't be looked at by anybody anyways. That's a given. You can't do it without that. So you need to figure this out, or you need to figure out who the people are at your university who handle that kind of stuff. But that's not the craft of grant writing. The craft of grant writing is to be able to write this research strategy in a way that is compelling to read for others, that they want to fund. So that's what I'm talking about. And no 2 or 3 day workshop is going to get you to a point where you can do that. That's the honest truth about it. You know, like when we go to these workshops, what we really want is to get this magic pill or this miracle tool that turns our crappy unfunded triage proposals into the wonder proposal with no work on our end. And the truth of the matter is that that does not exist. So in order for you to learn that, you have to put the effort and the work behind it. It's fun work though. And you know, my scientific thinking, my analytic thinking, my creativity with which I approach research has really changed and has really expanded with this work of learning how to write powerful grant proposals. The truth of the matter, though, is that most people rather put a lot of grants in that were thrown together last minute than going back to the drawing board and examining their own skill level, determining that it's not where it needs to be and that they have to put the effort in and ask for help to get the feedback that they need. This work is much harder than throwing stuff together quickly. It is harder and it takes more time, but in the end it takes less time because you don't go through rounds and rounds and rounds of unfunded grant proposals. Now that's not to say that you never have an unfunded grant proposal. You might, because there is this aspect of environment, but your skill level comes first, and that's the one thing you can and have to work on. That's the one within your control. So how do you go about unstucking yourself from not having funding? Get help. You don't have to do it alone. And in fact, you probably can't do it alone. You're a smart person if you are in the place to apply for grant funding. You already tried everything that you were able to do by yourself, and it got you here. If you want to get to another place, you need to try a different strategy. Now, one thing I will say though, beware of feedback from colleagues. Wonder where they learned the craft. Ironically, scientists are very good at making hearsay or their own anecdotal evidence sound like law when it comes to grant writing. So feedback from colleagues on the approach is great. Feedback from colleagues who don't have a solid training on writing proposals on the writing itself, on the pitching, on the strategy is not a good idea. You have to ask yourself where these rules that you're being told are coming from and what's behind it. Like, is there a solid reason for why you're doing it in that way? Or is it just something that you learned from a mentor before that? There's one thing that doesn't work anymore, and that is to write grants like grants were written 10, 15 years ago. It just doesn't work anymore. So if you get feedback or advice from mentors who were successful writing grants then, it's not very useful, right? Also beware of feedback from people who are authorities in the field, because they do have a little bit of this advantage that they are known and then get this extra credit, so they can get away with things that you cannot get away with. Get help, but know where you're getting help from, and make sure these people are qualified to give you help. So for disclosure, I'm working with a business called Marketing Your Science, who does exactly that, teaching people how to write grants. And if you want more information, reach out to me and I will provide that. But I ask you one thing very seriously, and that is that you get over yourself, over your ego, whatever it takes. It took me a full 3 months to get over my own ego, where I didn't deeply work on my writing and just like did some superficial edits when I got feedback, just because I had this fear inside. And the fear inside was, if I try really hard and I fail at getting good at this grant writing game, well, then that means, you know, I'm not good enough for this job, really, right? That's bullshit though, because if there's one thing that science taught me is that we are incredible human beings. Like, our brains are incredible adaptation machines. We can accomplish and achieve and learn any skill if we just put the right amount of effort and time behind that. That goes for grant writing. But to just put time behind that, to just write grants, like to write 45 grants and submit them all and get non-funded, right? That's not going to fix the challenge. You have to get feedback from somebody who knows what they are doing, and ideally from somebody who knows how to teach others how to do it right, or how to do it in a way that's effective. So that's all I had today. If you are in academia and you are committed to your success, then subscribe to the YouTube channel here, or join our Facebook community, Team Leadership and Research, where we really support each other in and lift each other up to be successful together. Bye.